What's going on, guys? This is Ryan with the Outpost, and with The Last of Us Part 2 out there in the world, with so many gamers letting everyone know exactly how they feel about this game, and what Neil Druckmann, director of The Last of Us Part 2, vice president of Naughty Dog Studios, decided to do with the story and with these characters, a lot of people are wondering what is the next step for this franchise and for Neil Druckmann. Now, we do know that HBO is currently working on a Last of Us TV series with Neil Druckmann at the head of it. So we're going to talk about that. But also, in an interview, Neil Druckmann hinted at what the future plans and a possible sequel, a Last of Us Part 3, God help us all. So let's go take a look at that. Now, I did want to we always update you guys exactly what is happening with the user score. 45,000 negative reviews to 30,000 positive reviews, with mixed nearing 3,000. Now, it continues to very slowly creep up with the positive reviews. We will keep you guys updated as to what's going on here. But let's get to this interview. Neil Druckmann comments on the possibility of The Last of Us 3. Now, after the fallout from this, I think it's going to be interesting. There's no doubt that this game is selling really well. It was one of the most pre-ordered games of all time because, people got tricked into thinking that this was going to be a game about Joel and Ellie. People had such love for the first game, thought that they were going to get some more of that in the second game, only to have their expectations subverted for shock value. And before I get to this, I should say, because it always comes up in nearly every video I do, we will likely be talking about spoilers for The Last of Us Part 2. If for some reason you still want to play it, I don't want to spoil it for you, so I wouldn't recommend watching any further. But let's get on with this. Neil Druckmann, one of the creators of The Last of Us and its sequel, has commented on whether or not there will be a follow-up to the game. Now, he doesn't sit there and say there definitely will be, there definitely won't be. He plays it kind of coy, right? As you would expect him to. But let's see what he says. This past Friday, The Last of Us 2 hit the world, much to the excitement of fans who have been eagerly awaiting its release since its 2016 announcement. Of course, that announcement prominently featured Joel and Ellie. What a shock. Even though fans are just starting to roll credits on this game, some people are already trying to get information about a possible sequel. What would you even do in a sequel? Would it be about Abby? Is that what you would do? Would it be about Abby, or would it be Ellie trying to regain her life after deciding not to kill Abby and still losing everything she had? In an interview, Neil Druckmann, one of the directors and writers of the game, commented on the possibility of The Last of Us 3 and said it was about what fans would expect. The news comes the way of IndieWire, who conducted the spoiler-filled interview, and we talked a little about this, and here is that entire interview. I do have it pulled up in case we need to get to the exact quotes he used. And that was with Neil Druckmann and Hallie Gross, the other writer. The two discussed a number of things, not just the prospect of a sequel, including its themes, its ending, and more, and we talked a little bit about that yesterday. According to Druckmann, while he isn't immediately ruling out the idea of a sequel, he says that he would consider it in a similar way to this game. Why don't we just look at the exact quotes? This is what Druckmann says when asked if there will be a sequel. I'll be a little vague and cagey, as you can expect, but I think the test for whether or not to make a Part 3 would have to be a similar test to what we did with Part 2. With the first game, there were no expectations and it was like we could do anything. But now that we've established certain characters and themes and processes, it felt like a justify to make a Part 2, and we had to do something, not that fans would just be comfortable with, but something that would match the emotional core we found in the first game. The problem is, it seems like you went out of your way to make people uncomfortable. Not that, fans, it's not necessarily looking for something that fans will be comfortable with, but something that would subvert their expectations and shock them in the same way that people tried to do with Star Wars, with The Last Jedi, in the same way that they tried to do with Game of Thrones Season 8. And there's a great correlation between Game of Thrones Season 8 and what we're about to talk about with the HBO. So we will get there. And without that, there'd be no reason to do a Part 3. finding it with the sequel was much harder than the first game, and going forward, it would be exponentially harder to justify going back to that world and finding a way to vary things up. Now, what that tells me and what we've all known is they never had a plan to do a sequel for this game. They made it out of thin air, which I think makes a whole lot of sense when you realize how poorly it was executed. What a big problem so many people have. It was never planned out like this. They just tried to create something that, again, would give you shock value by killing Joel, everyone's favorite character, 2 hours into the game for a stupid reason, with him acting like an idiot, yet still marketing the game as if he would be in it because you knew that was the only way you were going to sell the game. If you sold this game as an Ellie and Abby game, you would not have had the same sales. There's no doubt. You would not have had these same pre-orders. You would not have had these same sales numbers. You used Joel, even though you knew he wasn't going to be as big a part of the game as anyone thought he was. Disgusting. There's already so many things you've seen about the backstory, about how the outbreak happens, so we'd really have to figure out how to create a new experience that matches the emotional impact of these stories, and I don't know what it is currently. So definitely not ruling out a part 3, not saying it's happening either, but they would take the same approach as this game. Now, I think that when we see the fallout of this reaction, it is going to be very similar to what happened in Game of Thrones Season 8. Now, we know Game of Thrones finale was the most watched HBO show of all time, and that entire season had the highest ratings of any season ever. Now, it does make sense. It's wrapping it up, finishing, right? That people would be really interested. But there was also people that turned in just to see the dumpster fire that it became. That David Benioff and D.B. Weiss absolutely ruined this series. Now, for me, watching it started in season 6. I really started to feel like things were going off the track. Other people, like more hardcore fans of the books, realized it in season 4 and 5. But definitely near the end of season 6, and I thought season 7 was trash. I didn't understand why everyone was praising it. Then we finally got Game of Thrones season 8. What happened after that? All these views, all these people that watched this train wreck happen, but it divided the fan base. So many people hated what they did. You had 5 Game of Thrones spin-offs in the works at HBO. Now, they're all basically done. There's one that we may still have, but all the other ones were canceled. They were canceled because of the backlash. The backlash that happened when you split the fans, when you tried to do things your way and it didn't work. That's exactly what I see happening with The Last of Us Part 2. There's not going to be this big demand for a sequel. There's going to be a demand for you to remake The Last of Us 2, which there already is. There are people that are already starting a petition for them to remake The Last of Us 2. I think, listen, it's interesting to think that people are doing that. I think those petitions are a little bit ridiculous. Same thing with the petitions to redo Game of Thrones Season 8 or petitions to redo the Star Wars trilogy. I think that that's just a little bit cringe. But if you want to go out there and do that, go for it. That's your right. But it's ironic that we may have an HBO show coming when we're making these comparisons to Game of Thrones. Last of Us series in development at HBO from Chernobyl creator. A series adaptation of the PlayStation game The Last of Us is in development. Chernobyl creator Craig Mazin is attached to write and executive produce the potential series, along with Neil Druckmann, the writer and creative director of the game. The project is in co-production with Sony Pictures Television and with PlayStation Productions. Listen to this. Neil Druckmann is without question the finest storyteller working in the video game medium, and The Last of Us is his magnum opus. Well, it's definitely not The Last of Us 2, I'll tell you that. And he also didn't have Bruce Staley there. Bruce Staley is not there anymore, is he? I wonder if that affected The Last of Us Part 2 at all. That's a question for a different video, though. The Last of Us, developed by Naughty Dog, takes place 20 years after modern civilization has been destroyed. Joel, a hardened survivor, is hired to smuggle Ellie, a 14-year-old girl, out of an oppressive quarantine zone. Yes, we know the story of The Last of Us. This is interesting. The HBO series will cover the events of the original game, which was written by Druckmann, with the possibility of additional content based on the upcoming game sequel, The Last of Us Part 2, which is due out in May. Now, with the current reaction, what do you want to bet? That they might not focus so much on the events of The Last of Us Part 2. And honestly, in the same way that so many people after The Last Jedi were not interested in seeing any more stories about Luke Skywalker in Disney canon because they know what happens to him, That is the same thing you're going to see with The Last of Us. There are going to be people that want nothing to do with this because of what Neil Druckmann and because of what Naughty Dog has done to the franchise that they created, to their benefit. They made an incredible game with The Last of Us. I did really enjoy The Last of Us. It wasn't my, top 5 games of all time like it is with many people, but I did really enjoy it. And everything that I enjoyed about that game, I've hated with what they have done for The Last of Us Part 2, and I think a lot of people feel the same way. I think we're going to have a Game of Thrones effect with this. When it comes to a possible sequel, when it comes to the HBO show, I think there's a chance you might not see these things happen because of the reaction. Because just like Game of Thrones Season 8, even if it did really well, it destroyed the fan base. People hated what they did, and they are not going to show up the next time. You lost so many of the fans that you won with the first installment. Let me know what you think about all this in the comments below. Make sure you smash a like button, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications, share this video out there, and I will talk to you later. Thanks for watching, everyone. And a huge shout out to my patrons. I appreciate you guys so much. Want to follow me on Twitter or Instagram? Check out the description below. You'll find links to my P.O. box and my Patreon as well. And I'll talk to you guys later.